We are recording this podcast on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We wish to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Priscilla.
And I'm Elise.
Welcome to Novel Feelings, where we discuss representations of mental health issues in fiction novels.
And welcome back to another review episode. Today we are reviewing It's Been a Pleasure, Noni Blake by Claire Christian.
And we are extra excited to welcome a special guest, Shelby from the Chub Rub Book Club. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be joining you.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here too. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your podcast?
Yeah, so I am joining y'all from Ohio in the United States, and my co-host Jenny currently lives in, I'm going to forget the name of the state, Louisiana, and is soon moving home to Tennessee. So we actually do our podcast from a distance. We are best friends that met in graduate school and really love books and talking about books with each other. And we also both care a lot about embodiment, or, sort of how we live and think about our bodies, how we inhabit them, and what that means for how we live our lives. And so sort of wanting to reflect on how that shows up in books and how it's portrayed, both portrayed well and not so well. And that's where we came up with Chub Rub Book Club. I had such a good time when the two of you joined us on our podcast for discussion on House of Salt and Sorrows. Our episode has not come out yet. We're a little behind in editing, but yeah, just really enjoyed our conversation with y'all and love the premise of and your actual podcast. I listened to it and I'm a big fan. So yeah,
that's so nice.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun during that discussion as well. And we love the goals and focus of your podcast. And I think you'll bring a really good perspective to what we're discussing today as well.
Thanks.
Can you also tell us a little bit about the books that you have covered so far as part of Chub Rub Book Club?
Yes. So we've only done a few episodes that have actually come out so far, just because we both, work full time. I know y'all do as well.
It is hard to work around it, isn't it?
It is. Most of what we cover is sort of the fantasy, sci-fi genre fiction, mostly because that's what we like to read. Part of what we hope to do is also really encourage younger readers to think critically about the books that they're reading. I especially did not do that a whole lot as a teenager, and internalized a lot of things that I read and did so unknowingly. So it's one of the reasons I like your podcast is, really paying attention to the way that people and feelings and bodies are portrayed.
Yeah, love it. It's always good to encourage critical thinking in other people.
Yeah, I'm keen to dive into the review because I would really love to start discussing this book. But before we do, just a couple of disclaimers. So first of all, note that we are a spoiler podcast. We will be talking in depth about what happens in this book. We also note that this podcast should not be taken as therapeutic advice. And we're speaking today as psychologists and book lovers, not necessarily from direct lived experience, and we acknowledge that our voices are limited this way. Stay tuned at the end of this episode for some more information about the issues covered in this book, including perspectives from people with lived experience.
Great. To tell you a little bit about the author, Claire Christian is a storyteller, a writer, theater maker, and facilitator. She has had 4 plays published by PlayLab, including Liza and the Freeborn Dames, which debuted in 2018. She has also had the great joy of directing Michelle Law's smash hit comedy Single Asian Female. Claire's debut novel Beautiful Mess won the Text Prize in 2016. It's Been a Pleasure, Noni Blake is her first novel for adults. So, Elise, we actually saw Single Asian Female in 2019.
Yeah, I had no idea that Claire Christian was attached to it. I watched it. I wanted to see it because I really like Michelle Law and her writing and her comedy. And yeah, this is an interesting little fact that I came across when I was looking up these author bios. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting to know that she directed it.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful play as well. It was funny, but also heartbreaking. Yeah, I would say you have to see it, but I don't think it's up anymore.
No, it was originally only in Brisbane, and then it did come to Melbourne, and I'm not sure if it was anywhere else, but would love that one to be adapted into a TV show. That would be great, I think.
Yeah, it would be.
Anyway, a little bit more about the book. Noni Blake knows she wants more. More adventure, more joy, more romance, more orgasms, more pleasure, more everything. Now she just has to figure out how to get it. Noni didn't expect to be starting over at the age of 36, but 18 months after the end of her long-term relationship, she decides it's time to start living her life again. While an encounter with a sexy firefighter is a welcome entry back into the dating world, Noni soon realizes she's looking for more than just a series of brief, pleasurable encounters. She's looking for more pleasure in, well, everything. That's how she finds herself traveling to Europe to track down the one that got away, the alluring, elusive Molly. But Europe may have other surprises in store. All right, so why did we decide to cover this book?
Okay, well, I have a funny story about how I came across this. So early in 2020, there was horrendous bushfire. So the Australian author community came together under the hashtag Author for Fireys to raise money for the firefighters. Claire Christian put two things up for auction. So you could bid to be a character in this upcoming romantic comedy novel, or you can bid for a dedication. I did bid to be the inspiration for the character, but I got outbid, so I was like, fine.
I wonder which character you would have been. That could have been so interesting.
Yeah, I wonder that too, but that's okay. But I wanted to donate anyway, so I went for the second thing, the dedication. And I won that one, and Claire Christian kindly sent me an advanced reader copy of the book as well. But as you can see, the book is not dedicated to me exactly.
So what does it say exactly?
Have you got it there, Shelby?
I do. It says, "Here's to you, and doing whatever feels good. Here's to you, and all of your pleasure."
So you means Priscilla. But Claire, if you're listening to this, maybe like a little bit more specific could have been nice. I can see what you were going for, though.
Yeah, like on one hand, I'm like, she doesn't know me. She doesn't know if I'm a good person or a bad person, I guess, apart from the fact that I donated to the firefighters. So like, I guess she can't actually dedicate this book to me. Though she did, in that copy that she sent me, she circled dedication. So I'm just going to pretend that this is for me and my pleasure.
I love it. Live your truth.
Yeah.
You should really just cross out the U in your copy and just write Priscilla.
Yeah.
In like capital letters.
Yeah. But I also suggested this book for us because, well, one, I thought we should do another contemporary romance this season, and something that's quite fun and joyful, especially given, Elise, your trend of reading stories of dead teenagers this year.
Yeah, there's just been a very high proportion of the books I've read recently happen to include dead, dying, or suicidal teenagers. And that's my fault for reading that many books in a row, but it was really nice to break that up with something like Noni Blake, which made me feel a bit better about life in general.
Yeah, and I thought this was a good one for us to cover with Shelby as well, given the focus of Chub Rub Book Club.
Yes, I had no idea sort of what to expect going into this book, aside from like the pleasure aspect, which is very clear in the synopsis. And then the cover of the book And so it was a really pleasant surprise just how much embodiment is sort of explored here.
Yeah, thought it would be a good fit. And, I personally as well have a special interest in body image and eating disorders. That was a large focus of my clinical work back when I was in a counselling role. So I really love reading body positive narratives, or reading about even body neutrality as well, which is a slightly different but related concept. So it was really nice to see this, and I think it had quite a sort of empowering aspect to it. And just briefly, before we get to the actual review, what we are covering today in terms of some of the mental health and related issues includes anxiety, panic attacks, self-esteem, and body image challenges, as well as self-care. And a couple of additional content notes that this story also contains information and plot lines related to relationship breakdowns, fat phobia, miscarriage, and there is quite a bit of sexual content in this book that we will be discussing, although not necessarily in graphic detail.
And by a bit, she means a lot.
There's a lot of sex in this book, but we're not going to give you a play-by-play of every sex scene in this book. It's not really our tone, but we will acknowledge when that's coming up. All right, let's jump into our recap.
So 36-year-old teacher Noni Blake wakes up the morning after having great sex with a gorgeous blonde firefighter. And it was essentially a one-night stand. She didn't even know the firefighter's name, but it was a good night. And for the first time, Noni had had sex with someone since she broke up with her girlfriend, Joan. They were together for 9 years and had loved each other deeply, but their relationship deteriorated over time. And later we learned that it ended after a series of troubles, which included a miscarriage and a long battle with IVF.
Yeah, I really like that portrayal of how Joan and Noni they still love each other, but it's just not in the same way anymore, which I think is quite realistic after such a long relationship and so many issues and grief.
Yeah, and I got the impression as well that some of the issues they were having in the relationship were present before the battle with IVF as well. So it wasn't that was what broke them up, but one of many sort of interweaving things that led to their relationship needing to end. And Noni's certainly been grieving this relationship for a long time as well, which feeds into a lot of what else happens in this story. After the night with the firefighter, Noni compiles a list of all the people she's ever had sex with. After debriefing with her best friend, Lyndall, who's a great character, by the way, even if he is a very background character, Noni begins to realise how limited her experiences are and how she hasn't been prioritising herself for a long time. They begin talking about people that Noni could have slept with but never did, sort of contemplating missed opportunities. Noni begins to realise how much life she's missing out on and starts to plan for a kind of sexual revolution. And a string of awkward sexual encounters ensue, including Ben, who is a drug dealer she knew in her early 20s. And we get kind of our first sex scene of the book, which is a pretty, mediocre in terms of the pleasure aspect. And he also tells her that he doesn't normally sleep with quote-unquote fat chicks. Yeah, that was the first point where I sent a photo of the page to Priscilla with like a series of exclamation points going, why would you? Oh, awful.
Yeah.
So naturally, this encounter leaves her feeling pretty crappy. And later, we also get her hooking up with her boss. So she's a teacher and works in a school. So this is a school principal. And there's a very awkward sex scene that doesn't exactly go as Noni had expected. Let's just say that he was into some kink that she wasn't expecting.
Not to yuck anyone's yum, but if I were Noni, I would not turn up to work the next day. That's just too much to know about your boss.
The rubber sheets, like when it said rubber sheets, I was like, wow, this took a turn.
Yeah. So, again, just like do what you want, but I don't think that kind of got into that with her fully knowing what to expect. So that's where I think the issue may have lain.
Yeah. I like that, we start off with the focus being on sex, but I feel like we get a hint that it's not just about sex, it's about Noni's feelings about her body as well, and that it's about her lack of confidence that might be getting in the way, or at least contributing to the lack of sexual encounters that she's had. Not that you have to have a lot of sexual encounters to feel good about yourself. I feel like that's important to mention.
Yeah. But also the bigger picture of her just not prioritizing herself, not really being adventurous or having a lot of experiences, and sort of her anxieties and her fear and her lack of confidence getting in the way of a lot of what she has desired over the years. And, it's been 18 months since she's broken up with Joan. And that time has been a lot of grieving, and now getting the sense that she finally wants to make some active changes in her life to prioritize herself, to seek out what she's potentially missed in the past. I also like the sort of tone of it's not too late to reinvent yourself and to seek what you do desire.
Yes.
I thought that was really nice coming through this story.
So the firefighter seems as though she could be Noni's next flame, but then she learns tragic news. The firefighter died soon after their first encounter. That was a turn as well.
Yeah.
So this starts to put things into perspective for Noni as she thinks about what people would say at her own funeral. She realizes that she's become too comfortable with life and quote unquote happy being unhappy. This leads to her reaching out to an old contact, Molly, the one that got away, in all caps. She also gets a dramatic new haircut. She goes shopping and she buys clothes outside of her comfort zone that makes her feel good about her body. She attends a dancing in the dark session with Lyndall and has a great time.
So I really appreciated starting to see how her mindset was changing, and this sort of, series of seemingly small things that she was doing, even before she goes to Europe, which we know is coming up in the story. And to see her, shifting towards more body acceptance and more celebration of what her body can do. And as someone who's been into a Dancing in the Dark event a couple of times, or as it was branded here, at least, no lights, no lycra, it is a lot of fun. And you kind of go in, the lights are off and the music's pumping, and you can only just see each other. Like, you can sort of, your eyes adjust to the dark as well. So you're not going to like bang into each other or hit each other or kick each other. But yeah, you kind of, I started off a bit like hesitant, not really sure. And then by about 10 minutes in, I'm just like having the time of my life dancing in the dark. So yeah, it is a lot of fun.
I really loved, too, her sort of internal monologue that, we get a little bit of a glimpse of. That's like, she had to spend a good few minutes sort of convincing herself that not everyone was like looking at her, and this wasn't some elaborate scheme to, sort of humiliate her. Like, I resonated with that so much. Like, when you say it sounds kind of silly, right? But those feelings are so real. And I guess that's, I love that after the no lights, no lycra, or dancing in the dark, later on in the book, that sort of dancing with abandon, even with the lights on, sort of comes back as a theme.
Yeah. It makes me think of the classic makeover montage in a rom-com movie. And it seems really cheesy, but I feel like there's power in feeling good about the way you look as well. And I love that she's discovering that in this section.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the fact it's for her as well, it's not for someone else. It's not because of, she wants a boy to like her, or, someone has been mean to her, so she wants to show them. It's like, no, this is actually this is the dream haircut that I've always worried I couldn't pull off. And then she gets the haircut and everyone's like, you look incredible.
Yeah.
Why haven't you done this years ago? The scene where she goes and tries on new outfits as well. Yeah, I can't remember the exact quote that was in the book, but she essentially said something to the sales assistant after trying on a skirt or a dress, and she says, I'm not sure about it, you can kind of see my stomach like this. And the sales assistant says, that's okay, everyone has a stomach, it's fine for it to be there. And I really liked that, because screw wearing clothes that society deems flattering, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I think it really highlights from the beginning her insecurity in her own body. I mean, even when she's getting the haircut, her thought isn't, would this haircut like make me happy? It's, how will it look and with my face shape. And, you know, I don't think it'll be flattering. And the hairstylist is like, do you want it? Like, do you like it? Because that's what matters. And same thing with the sales assistant. And I'm like, man, can I get some of those people in my life? Like, I need someone like that when I'm shopping to be like, everyone has a stomach.
Yeah.
Appearance isn't everything, but I think it's important to treat your, you know, to display yourself and to make yourself look as you want to look. You know, there's value in that. That I think sometimes a lot of the discourse around this type of thing goes like, appearance isn't important, we shouldn't care about it at all. I'm like, I see that point, but I also think it's important to look the way that you want to look, and to the image that you put forward to the world sort of demonstrates how you feel about yourself as well. And if you have the confidence to go out and to wear whatever you want, then I think that's fantastic. And you're going to look great if you're confident in activewear down the street as you would in a ball gown on a red carpet. So, you know, wear what you want to wear and own it, as far as I'm concerned. Easier said than done, though.
Yeah. That reminds me of how I felt about the way I looked when I was growing up as well. Like, I was always like, well, I'm not one of the pretty ones, so I'll just be one of the smart ones, and not realizing that actually women can be both. Like, it's not shallow to care about the way you look or put on makeup or dress up the way that you want. And it doesn't make you stupid either. I used to wear clothes just to blend in and not have people pay attention to the way I look. And when I started dressing the way I want, I started to feel more comfortable in my own skin. And that actually did a lot of good to the way I feel about myself and my own mental health.
Yeah. I mean, I've done the haircut thing. I've dyed my hair all sorts of different colors. And, you know, one particular memory I have is in my first year of grad school, after going through a big relationship change in a friendship, I just felt like I was not living my best life and being my best self. And I needed something to sort of make me feel like I was going to have a fresh start. And I got a pixie cut. And it was something that I, like Noni, like I'd wanted it for a long time and just been like, like I will never pull that off. And I loved it. And it was so fun and liberating. And so, yeah, when she got the pixie cut, it took me by surprise and I loved it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love that so much. Yeah, I think with me, you know, one of the troubles I've had is because I had it drilled into me so much when I was growing up by, you know, family, friends, media, and so on, that you had to dress for your body type and that you had to, quote unquote, hide problem areas. So it took me years and years to wear a dress that wasn't like an A-line dress, or to wear, you know, things that might not hide my stomach. And, you know, I recognize that I am in a smaller body, so I do have privilege that comes from that. But I still have struggled a lot with body image issues over the years, and I still do sometimes, even as somebody who supports people through body image issues. It doesn't go away just because you know all of the facts and the right things that you should be thinking. So, you know, I still have to work my way through that quite often, but I have to remind myself that's okay if people see my body with the shape that it is, and there's no moral attachment to that. There's no bad body.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we say at the end of every episode of our podcast, all bodies are good bodies.
Exactly.
Which is not our like original saying, but still a good one.
But it's true.
Yes, absolutely.
So Noni suddenly comes into some money because the apartment that she had with Joan sells, and she decides to spend her portion of it on a trip to Europe for 6 months. She's looking for an adventure, but also really wanting to prioritize herself, and that's new. And so she embarks on what she calls a pleasure quest, a fulfillment of all of her desires and the places she's wanted to see, the things she's wanted to eat, the selfish moments she wishes she'd taken. It's not just about sexual pleasure, but that's definitely a part of it. I mean, we have the quote unquote to bone list or wish I'd boned people I didn't bone. I don't know. It was, you know, But yeah, sex was definitely a part of it.
Yeah. I think calling it a pleasure quest is really interesting because on the surface, it sounds really shallow. Like it will just focus on sex and food and clothes and
hedonistic kind of stuff.
yes. So as we discussed, those things actually do have value, but they're not if you only focus on those things, it seems very privileged, I suppose, and it's very, hedonistic is the only word I can think of now.
Which doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but
no, yeah, it's one part of a bigger picture, I suppose.
But even, thinking about the whole concept of a pleasure quest, I think the word pleasure has these connotations and sometimes even, dirty connotations. And what I've seen lately is more a naming of the value of pleasure. A favorite author and activist that I really love, Adrienne Marie Brown, actually wrote a book called Pleasure Activism. And it's about making even social justice a pleasurable human experience, awakening to desires and not settling for anything less than a fulfilling life. And so this novel really reminded me of that. And I think the way that it's written, for the most part, is a sort of liberation.
Yeah, I think that's great. So just to kind of backtrack a bit, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Noni's experiences with anxiety that come into the story as well, because it's definitely present from the start of the book, but it does flare up the month before her trip. So Noni is feeling highly anxious and is having panic attacks as well. So she's been living with anxiety and panic for a long time and references attending therapy in the past to help her cope with this, as well as life circumstances that have been happening for her. So her anxiety comes up throughout the book, including experiencing a panic attack while with her ex, Joan, after learning Joan is seeing someone new. So, accidentally seeing a text and realizing there's someone new in Joan's life. And, Joan knows how to support her through a panic attack, including guiding her breathing. Noni also draws on her own skill set here. So, for example, there's a quote through the book where she says, "This is one of the best things I learned in therapy, that when you catch yourself in an anxiety spiral or negative spin, you need to recognize the thoughts are false or self-sabotaging bullshit and reprimand them. You're not helpful, I think, concentrating on my breath, on being mindful, on noticing what is real, the feeling of my feet in my shoes, the cotton of my dress on my skin." So I kind of really appreciated how anxiety was portrayed as being part of Noni's life and that it flared at times, but we saw somebody who was quite experienced in managing it. So it hadn't gone away and it might not fully go away, but it's something that she's learned to cope with, and that there are people around her as well who've learned good ways to support her. And I really, appreciate that narrative as someone who has a similar experience with anxiety and panic, where there are times in my life where it's been quite impactful and times in my life where it's been in the background. But I've definitely, we all experience anxiety, some of us more than others. And depending on where you are in that spectrum, I'm quite high on the spectrum, but probably not reaching the diagnosis for something like generalized anxiety disorder. But there might have been times in my life where I have. So for me, it's really about learning and growing through that and learning how to manage it and learning what skills to apply. And so she's actually referencing a number of skills throughout this book. So referencing things like deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing and how that can be applied in panic attacks, because it's essentially trying to signal to your body that it's okay, that you're not in danger, and to calm down the body and to cope with that spiral, as well as techniques that you might learn in something like acceptance and commitment therapy, such as mindfulness and diffusion. So actually bringing her thoughts away from the panic and the basic catastrophizing that's running through her head, and bringing them to be more about the present moment and noticing what's real and to ground herself, as well as recognizing that thoughts aren't necessarily true, which is a diffusion technique, and trying to distance herself from them. So I thought that was really nice to see how that can be integrated.
Definitely. I resonated with that a lot as someone who has diagnosed anxiety and has panic attacks. And I mean, years of therapy, which I originally went to for disordered eating and didn't even realize that the anxiety I was feeling had a name and a diagnosis and techniques. And so seeing these techniques like that mindfulness and grounding was a really great reminder, especially as I've gotten back into regular therapy recently and are reviewing some of these techniques. I love that the way that she writes it is like she's experienced herself almost, or gotten that from someone who has. The feeling of the feet in my shoes, the cotton of my dress on my skin, those grounding techniques are something that I've used and I've been taught and have been really helpful for me.
Yeah. And from the therapist side of things, I suppose I like saying to clients that, the anxiety might never go away, but we can get it to a point where you can learn to manage it and it doesn't take over entirely. And I feel like that's important to highlight, because sometimes people come in saying, I just don't want to feel this way ever again. And that's not realistic, because anxiety serves a purpose. You just don't want it to run your life.
Exactly.
Hey, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Claire. We're the hosts of Fictional Hangover Podcast.
Fictional Hangover is a podcast about young adult and new adult books, series, authors, and voice actors that is full of spoilers.
New episodes are released every Wednesday. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts or on fictionalhangover.com.
Remember, the only cure for a fictional hangover is another book. Now, back to the episode.
So eventually Noni arrives in London, meeting up with a friend, Ness. She has 2 more sexual encounters with varying levels of pleasure. Noni then reunites with Molly, and they flirt and eventually sleep together, only to discover that Molly isn't being truthful about her romantic status. Molly has a French girlfriend, it turns out. Noni is devastated and breaks things off immediately. Unfortunately, this coincides with the 2-year anniversary of her baby's death, and Noni experiences a wave of grief.
Not a great start to the Europe trip, is it, for poor Noni?
Yeah, I guess sometimes the one that got away for a good reason.
Yeah, it was pretty awful of Molly to do that, obviously, but I think Noni had sort of built it up so much in her mind as well about what might happen, what that could mean. And I guess Molly kind of represented a core part of this pleasure quest as well. So sort of reuniting with somebody like her who, sort of represents chasing after pleasure, chasing after somebody that means something to you, that is personal to you. So for Molly to have a girlfriend, not tell Noni, and then still sleep with her, I think that kind of shattered some of what Noni had been building up. And then you've got the grief side of things coming in too. So yeah, poor Noni at this stage.
Grief is not linear. As we see with Noni, she's come to a stage where she accepts that this is something terrible that's happened. And it's not necessarily present in her day-to-day life, but there will still be times where that is on the forefront of her mind and that grief comes back.
And then we get a scene where Noni attends a retreat with Naz, Naz's partner, and some others. During this trip, Noni reflects on what pleasure means to her and begins to shape the pleasure quest into something that's a bit more tangible and defined. So some of the things that she highlights as being part of this quest include being someone who wears things she wants to wear, makes the first move, says what she thinks, feels confident enough to do anything on her own, doesn't think about calories and diets and just eats what her body craves, sticks up for herself, and values her own opinion and instinct, among quite a few other things. So I really liked this.
Yeah, it's a good definition, I think.
Yeah, the retreat really, I think, made me jealous of Noni. I think I was like, I want to go on a retreat like that. That sounds nice. And I love that she met some people there who really, and particularly other women who empowered her quest and actually end up, being a part of it with her.
Yeah, it struck me that while you're reading that, at least, that this definition is very female. I don't think a man would define his pleasure quest in the same way.
probably unlikely.
Yeah. Mm.
There's definitely that gendered aspect. So the things that, one of my favorite things, the patriarchy loves to tell women to do about, how they should look, what they should think, and how they should portray themselves, and when and where they should have an opinion. So I think a lot of this comes back to dismantling some of the messages that the patriarchy and general life experiences have taught Noni about how she should be presenting herself to the world and how she should be thinking about herself.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth mentioning there certainly is an amount of privilege that comes in with Noni being able to pursue pleasure in this way. So we've obviously got her taking 6 months off from her job and going to Europe for that time without intending to sort of work during that time. So just purely pleasure that, again, aligned with her definition of pleasure. But to be able to take that time off and to be able to support herself and to come back to a job that is sort of being held for her is a very privileged thing to be able to do. She does touch on this. I think it is acknowledged throughout the book that this isn't, something that everybody could be able to do. It's kind of like a wish fulfillment. If you had fantastic resources and set up around you, what would a pleasure quest look like for you?
Yeah, I found it a little bit, the ending in particular sort of gave me mixed feelings, but especially that when she went home with the intention to find pleasure sort of in her day-to-day life, that it didn't work. I mean, I think that there's something to be said for being able to find pleasure in the little things and in our imperfect lives. Something that, gave me some mixed feelings because it is this really fantastical journey that's inspiring and awesome. And I would love to do that, but never will I be able to afford it.
Yeah, I read this review by Jessie Tu, who is another Australian author, and she wrote that, this is basically Eat, Pray, Love without the cultural imperialism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had the same thought while I was reading it.
Not achievable for the average person, but, it is a story. There's a bit of suspension of disbelief, I guess, that comes into it.
Yeah, but this next part of the book is, I think, really when the pleasure quest starts to sort of get consistently good. Noni travels to Scotland and decides to get a tattoo of a daisy with some lines from a poem, a Mary Oliver poem, which I love, by the way. And we later learn that her baby was named Daisy. And Noni is very attached to her tattoo artist. They have an instant connection, and they actually run into each other at a bar after her appointment, and they end up sleeping together. And Bo, who she initially and actually continually calls the Viking, is this sensitive, sexy guy in tune with her needs. He actually has a young son, Zeppelin, who's 16, and Noni really gets along with him. Bo and Noni grow closer throughout the book, and they fall in love, and they even move in together, even though their relationship seems to have an expiration date.
Yeah, he's almost too perfect in a way, but I wasn't complaining, especially after Noni had such a series of unfortunate events, unfortunate sexual encounters with all these people along her trip. So it was kind of nice for her to actually meet somebody, to have that connection, and for things to just fall into place almost unexpectedly. I really liked him.
It's interesting because usually in a romance novel, both the male and the female lead, or, at least in a straight relationship, both have to overcome some sort of personal flaw, or, they have to adjust in order to be perfect for each other. But Bo sort of comes fully formed. Apart from the fact that they never discuss what was going to happen when Noni leaves, they talk about everything.
Yeah, they're a bit avoidant of that discussion, but yeah.
Yeah, but he's like, he understands his emotions, understands her emotions, talks about it. He's a good dad. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, no fatal flaw really was there. Yeah, they only have a few months together, but they fall into this pattern, I think, because of how compatible they are. the trouble with that, though, is that you can't necessarily have that level of like commitment if you know that things are going to end, but neither of them want to acknowledge that. So yeah, it was interesting. We do get a little bit of relationship drama as well. So, there's a scene where Noni runs into Molly, and Molly tries to apologize, and Noni's been, obviously very angry with her for very real reasons this whole time. And Molly tries to sneak in a kiss, and they get walked in on. And that was the point where I kind of expected the standard Act 3 relationship breakup, as you get in a lot of romance books, but we didn't get it. So I actually really like it when that doesn't happen. So,
yeah.
With a lot of romance novels, I get very frustrated with that Act 3 breakup because I know that the stakes are low and that they're going to get back together again. So it feels like manufactured drama. So the fact that they were able to kind of talk it through, I did appreciate. But yeah, in general, they seem pretty solid.
Yeah, I think the person that's really interesting in this is Molly, because to say that they ran into each other is kind. Like, well, Molly orchestrated that. But yeah, just Molly's sort of desperate need to, I don't know, explain herself or make things right.
Molly needs therapy.
Molly needs therapy big time.
Probably, yeah. So Noni's trip eventually ends, and she has to break things off with Bo. They say goodbye without really telling each other what they really feel. Noni arrives back in Australia, and her normal life seems to restart, including seeing Joan and her principal again.
And kind of hooking up with both of them again, too. So, of course, like, she's single again, but it's kind of like falling back into bad habits and relationships that just didn't really work in the first place.
Yeah. Noni begins to realize that the only thing connecting her to her old life is her best friend, Lyndall, and that's what she really wants is a life with Bo. So, despite her fear and anxiety, she books a flight back to Scotland, ready to go all in. She sort of finds Bo again. There's a whole scene there that I'm not going to spoil, even though we're a spoiler podcast. You need to read it to get the full feedback. But let's just say things don't go 100% according to plan, but she ultimately has her happy ending.
But yeah, I did appreciate as well that, realizing that there wasn't really anything that was tying her to her current life. And even though it was scary and anxiety provoking to move overseas to be with somebody that she's only known for a few months, that was what felt right to her. And Lyndall, the one thing that was tying her to her life in Australia, didn't he basically say to her at some point, like, just go, I love you, but I'm not going to force you to stay just so I can see you, like, go. So he was a very encouraging friend.
Yeah. But again, this is another moment where it shows Noni's privileges. Mm-hmm. One, you need to have the money, the career that allows you to go and basically move to the other side of the world. And it also probably helps that she's white and has an Australian passport. Like, I'm just imagining, I moved to Australia when I was 18, but the process of getting student visas, permanent residency, especially permanent residency, was not easy. I would never just decide I'm going to move to Scotland without months of preparation. And if I wanted to move to the US, I would have to sit through an interview just to get a visa.
The US process is awful.
But it's also specific to particular countries as well. And Australia is not one of those countries. So, yeah, great for Noni, but not, it's not possible for everyone to do that.
It's also not clear if she's going back to teaching or if she, is going to work with this friend that she made doing these boudoir photo shoots, which, is super fun and cool, but also I don't know, that part was kind of ambiguous.
My impression was that she's good at her job, but she doesn't necessarily love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're right. She might not want to go back to teaching when she's in Scotland.
But again, that's privilege. I don't really know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I think that wraps up our recap. Shall we talk about our favourite moments and our ratings?
All right, let's do it.
Priscilla, why don't you go first? What did you like the most about this book?
Okay. Well, I really love her definition of pleasure. It makes me think of something that I heard in a lecture once, that self-care isn't about, just face mask and a spa day or sitting on the couch with tea and a book, even though those things are really good too. But self-care is also about things that nourish your soul. So that sort of more spiritual or mental joy, I suppose, that you get from certain activities or just living, as Shelby said, living your truth. I also love this vibe of, woman goes on a self-discovery journey, meets a cute guy along the way, dresses up really cute and gets a really great haircut as well. That sort of rom-com that you used to have a lot of. Bring that back, please. I want more of that.
Shelby, what were your favorite moments?
Part of the book that really made me go like, yes, I think I'm gonna like this is the scene where Noni is sort of like counseling the kid that shit in the trumpet on a dare. Like, I cackled. I was sitting next to my husband reading this in bed, and I just had to read him like the whole thing, and he did not find it nearly as funny as I did, but I was like, that is hilarious. It was less about favorite moments for me and more about favorite characters. Like, I really loved the character development even more than I loved the plot.
What about you, Elise?
Yeah, I agree with what you both said. I'll also comment, I did like the awkward but sort of it realistic in a way sex scenes.
Yes.
So, I find reading romance books, a lot of the narrative around sex scenes is often very unrealistic to real life. It's often very perfect and very scripted to go in a certain way, particularly with heterosexual sex scenes. So I kind of appreciated how like almost messy some of these were, complex, things didn't go according to plan. There were moments where people didn't fully communicate with each other, the moments where one person got pleasure and the other person didn't, and that sort of commented on, moments of self-doubt, like all of these things that can come into sex in real life. I did, appreciate that, and the way the book sort of presented that too and talked about it, I thought was really nice to see a rom-com book with that level of
cringe.
So the cringe. I enjoyed the cringe aspect.
Yeah.
And my favorite line from the book, I didn't write it down specifically, but it was something along the lines of, I'm now the common denominator in my own happiness. And I really appreciated that. So the idea that not needing to rely on other people or life circumstances to find happiness, I thought that was a really nice, sort of cherry on top of the character development arc to get to that point. So I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was a fun, sort of rewarding journey about prioritizing yourself and learning to love yourself and respect your own needs and desires. And same as Shelby, it made me laugh out loud at times, particularly in the first probably third or so of the novel. There were a lot of really funny moments that came in. I really liked the content around self-esteem and body positivity, sex positivity, and self-care. The reason it's 4 stars instead of 5 for me is because there were a few things that I didn't like so much. First of all, I thought the pacing could have been improved a little bit. The Europe trip takes place over 6 months, but I felt that felt almost rushed to the reader. Like it didn't feel like sort of 6 months worth of time had passed. I don't specifically know how I would handle that. Pacing is hard to write, but I felt that was just slightly off for me. I also note that Noni was drinking a lot through the book, which we haven't really touched on, but pretty much every non-beau sex scene involves her being drunk first. And that was kind of never really reflected on about what that could mean, what relationship that might have with her own confidence. And it's struck me as being a little bit unhealthy. I don't have anything against drinking. I do drink myself, but I thought there was maybe an opportunity to reflect on that a little bit more in the book that wasn't really taken. It was almost presented as being kind of normal to be that drunk, and to sort of drinking was conflated with the pleasure aspect a lot, which I wasn't a big fan of. I also think there was a little bit of a missed opportunity to talk about how pursuing pleasure can feel a bit empty at times. So, in psychology, when we talk about something called behavioral activation, this is about including things in your life that give you a sense of both pleasure and mastery to bring on a sense of fulfillment and to improve mood and well-being and that kind of thing. So what we often find is that when people pursue pleasure and don't pursue mastery or achievement, things feel off balance, just as if you pursue mastery or achievement and you don't pursue pleasure too. So a classic example of the latter is when someone's working all the time and not doing anything fun for themselves. But it can also feel the same way if you're just, I don't know, partying all the time or spending all day watching Netflix or doing things without actually pursuing something that gives you a sense of achievement too. So I would have liked that to have just been fleshed out a little bit more. Priscilla, how about you?
I give this book a 5 stars. I just remember really loving reading it. The story feels really warm and fun, and it gave me a lot of comfort despite all the cringy sex scenes. Like they're still fun to read. I'm just never loaning this to any other friends at this stage. I love Noni as a character. I agree with Shelby. Her character growth is the best part of the novel, and I really relate to some of her insecurities as well. Like, I've mentioned some of this before, but in Australia, I'm considered average sized. I think someone called me tiny once, and I was like surprised. But that wasn't the case when I was growing up in Indonesia. So there was a lot of focus on me being fat and what I was eating. So to see her, get dressed the way she wants to and grows, and how she grows to feel more comfortable in her own skin, that was really relatable and really nice to see on the page. There's this line at the end that I love that says, "I don't want a pleasure quest. I just want to live my life on my own terms." Simple. And I think that having that at the heart of the story is what saves this from being an empty story about hedonistic pleasure as well. And it's actually not that simple to live your life on your own terms sometimes. So to prioritize that can be quite revolutionary, I suppose, in some ways. I fully understand that this is a romantic comedy, and there is some suspension of disbelief that goes with that. And what about you, Shelby? How would you rate this book?
I am sort of hovering between 4 stars and like 4.5 stars, 4.25. A lot of that is for the reasons that you both have already named. The character development and growth is beautiful. The plot is fun and enjoyable. And like you talked about, Priscilla, I really identified with Noni. As someone who in the United States, because of the BMI, is considered obese, which is not a word that I would have used to describe myself. And especially when I was younger and much thinner, fat was definitely seen as a bad word. And my parents are both doctors. And so there's a lot of sort of that medical stigma there as well. And so especially in the past few years, as I've struggled with different health issues and disordered eating, and really trying to find a home in my own body, I've had a lot of the same experiences that Noni did in terms of the negative ones. I've not had nearly the same amount of positive experiences. And so this book for me was really inspirational in a lot of ways. I am encouraged to go to a store and buy an item of clothing that I like that isn't necessarily considered flattering. I'm trying to grow my hair out right now, but, after reading this, part of me is like, I should go back for the pixie cut. And I think especially the good sex that she has where, she can be fat and sexy, and those things are not contradictory. And the way that she really, not just the way that other people love her body, but the way that she slowly, imperfectly comes to love her own body is so important. And it is imperfect. She goes back and forth between those moments of, love and doubt and those narratives in her mind about, what's wrong with her. But I just really identified with her character in that way. This book was fun and funny and meaningful, particularly in regards to body image. So yeah, I'm sticking with my 4.25.
I like it.
Now that we have finished our recap and review, let's talk about resources.
All right, so on our website, on the blog post that goes up alongside the episode, some of the resources we'll link to include information about anxiety and panic and how to get support, information about body image, including content such as info about body acceptance and body positivity or body neutrality, if you want to learn more about some of those concepts. We'll also include some information about coping with grief after miscarriage as well.
We will also include recommendations for other fiction novels. So if you like this book and you want to read something similar, check out One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. This is a story about a fat fashion blogger who stars in a bachelorette-type TV show. Be mindful that there is a lot of fat shaming in this book. It's addressed and criticized, but it's on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Teach Me by Olivia Dade is a romance featuring an older couple, which is also really sweet. The majority of Olivia Dade's books feature fat women, and this is also reflected by the cover arts, which is really great, I think. I will also link to a post by an account called Bookstagram Represents of 18 books for Bisexual Awareness Week. So if you want to read other romantic comedy novels, I would highly recommend The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary.
Such a good book.
Absolutely, yes. Girl Gone Viral by Alicia Ray, which also includes anxiety representation. Alyssa Cole's Reluctant Royal series is also worth checking out.
Really, I recommend Adrienne Marie Brown's work in general, but the book that I mentioned is called Pleasure Activism, and Adrienne Marie Brown is Black, and so speaks from that experience of a Black person in America. And it's a really cool book. It's a follow-up to the book Emergent Strategy, which is also excellent. Both of these are nonfiction, but are very good reads.
Awesome.
This is a fairly recently published book, so not a huge number of reviews that were available. So we won't be highlighting any specific reviews that people have about the book and how its relatability. But I did want to highlight a couple of great commentators about body image that I have followed for a number of years that I thought might be of interest to listeners. So first of all, Megan Jane Crabb, her Instagram is at BodyPosiPanda, and she also wrote a book called Body Positive Power, which I have on my shelf, but I'm yet to read, unfortunately. We'll get there eventually. So she is a media commentator and a writer and an activist who writes a lot about body image, fat phobia, reclaiming the word fat, diet culture, and lots of other related concepts. So she has personally recovered from an eating disorder and talks about a lot about learning to reclaim her body after that experience, and talks about ongoing challenges that she might have. I'll also link to Lucy Mountain, who's a fitness blogger I've been following for a few years. Normally I avoid fitness bloggers like the plague because I just don't find it particularly helpful. The reason I really like Lucy Mountain is because she talks a lot about diet culture, about her own personal experiences and being wrapped up in diet culture for years as a personal trainer and a fitness influencer, and then learning to sort of dismantle that over time. And she currently does a lot of work around encouraging fitness and exercise without a weight loss focus, without a before and after focus, and talks a lot about like some of the awful messages that you might see on social media and other kind of fitness related media.
The book, The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love, which is by Sonia Renee Taylor, is excellent and worth checking out.
Fantastic.
Excellent. I also just want to add that you would have noticed that I used the word fat before as well. I also believe in reclaiming that word and removing the judgmental value that people put on it when they use it. So yeah, it's a descriptor. It's not a judgment on anyone's moral character. And I think we should use it that way.
I think so, although I still acknowledge that a lot of people use it as a slur.
Yeah.
So if somebody chooses not to use it, I think that's perfectly okay. But I think important to understand that if we're using it, that's our understanding of the word and how we wish to apply it.
Okay, well, that wraps us up for today. Well, Shelby, before we go, can you tell us where we can find Chub Rub Book Club?
Yes, absolutely. So you can find our podcast, Chub Rub Book Club, on most podcast hosting platforms. We record using Anchor, so you can always find us there. We are also on Instagram at Chub Rub Book Club, and we have a website, chubrubbookclub.com.
Wonderful. And for all of the resources we mentioned in this episode, check out our website, novelfeelings.com. We post an episode summary and links to further reading for each episode, as well as information about getting support for you or somebody that you care about.
And if you like us, please remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to ask us a question or to chat, you can send us a message via our website or social media. So you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads at novel_feelings.
You can also find me on Bookstagram at Pave with books with an extra S.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening today. And a big thank you once again to Shelby for joining us. Such a pleasure to have you here today.
It's been a pleasure.
Hey.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure, Novel Feelings.
Indeed.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Catch you next time.
See ya.